Imagine December 1944. The Western Front was no longer just a line on a map. It had become a living, breathing nightmare. Villages lay in ruins. Roads were flooded or frozen solid. Forests stripped bare. And exhausted men pushed forward, one hedgerow at a time. American soldiers, advancing through eastern France toward the German borderlands, often expected either fierce resistance or quiet surrender. But what they encountered outside a small, half-destroyed town near the Saar region was neither. It was the kind of tension that makes you hold your breath, the type of moment that defines a soldier's courage. A company of American infantry stopped at the edge of a narrow road lined with leafless trees and burned-out wagons. Reports from reconnaissance patrols warned of a German rearguard holding a cluster of stone farm buildings just ahead. No artillery fire, no movement, only silence. And in late 1944, silence rarely meant safety. A squad cautiously moved forward, expecting either empty buildings or a quick surrender. Instead, a single rifle shot cracked through the frigid air, striking the dirt near their feet. Then another. Controlled, deliberate, calculated. The squad fell back immediately. The company commander sent a runner to confirm the enemy's position. Through binoculars, an American lieutenant caught a glimpse of the man in charge. He stood in the doorway of the largest building, wearing a long coat, a field cap pulled low, a pistol holstered at his side, binoculars hanging from his neck. He was calm. He was watching. Captured prisoners mentioned him in passing. A major, an older officer, a veteran of the Eastern Front. Someone who had already decided how this encounter would unfold. Someone who understood the weight of responsibility and the meaning of duty. The Americans brought a loudspeaker forward. A German-speaking corporal called out clearly, "You are surrounded. Lay down your arms. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention." After a pause, a single rifle shot fired into the air answered them. Then silence again. The Americans tried once more, louder this time, more explicit, offering warmth, medical care, survival. And the response came in German, calm, almost polite. The major refused. He stated he was an officer of the German army, ordered to delay the enemy. He would not surrender. There were no insults, no shouting, just the unwavering statement of fact. The lieutenant lowered his binoculars and glanced at his men. They were exhausted, soaked, cold, having marched for nearly 72 hours with minimal rest. None wanted a firefight over a farm that held no strategic value. Yet the road mattered. Higher command was notified. The reply came swiftly. "Do not bypass. Do not leave a hostile force in your rear. Resolve it." The Americans prepared for an assault. Mortars were brought up, but the commander hesitated. By late 1944, many officers had learned that not every problem demanded immediate force. Another attempt was made. A white cloth tied to a stick signaled an offer of parley. An unarmed NCO walked halfway down the road, hands visible, calling out surrender terms once more. This time, the major stepped fully into view. He did not raise his weapon. He listened. The NCO repeated the terms, emphasizing care, warmth, food, survival. The major responded slowly, honestly. His men were exhausted, aware of the hopelessness of victory, yet he would not retreat again. For him, surrender was not just tactical, it was personal. The NCO asked how many men he commanded. The major did not answer. Instead, he asked, "How much time will you give us?" The NCO relayed the question to the company commander. The men waited. The commander's answer surprised several of them. 1 hour. 1 hour to reconsider before the Americans would advance. The tension was tangible. Rifles rested. Mortar crews waited. every second stretching endlessly in the cold December air. Within that hour, a young German soldier emerged from the side buildings, hands raised, shivering from cold or fear. He said the major had dismissed him, that surrender was allowed if he chose. Minutes later, 2 more followed. The Americans treated them with care, blankets, warmth, dignity. Yet the major remained in the doorway, steadfast, unwavering. When the hour expired, nothing had changed. The road was still frozen, the trees still bare, the air still painfully cold. But everything else had shifted. The waiting was over. The American commander checked his watch once more, not because he doubted the time, but because he understood what the next decision meant. Orders were orders. The hostile force remained. The road still mattered. The signal was given quietly. No dramatic shout, no whistle, just a hand motion passed down the line. Machine gunners adjusted their positions. Riflemen checked their magazines. The mortar crews received their firing instructions, not to destroy the buildings, but to seal them off. This would not be a reckless assault. It would be controlled, professional, final. The first bursts of machine gun fire cut across the windows of the stone farm buildings, precise and disciplined. Glass shattered inward. Chips of stone flew from the walls. The intent was clear: suppress, not annihilate. Almost immediately, German return fire answered, scattered and weak. The sound told the Americans everything they needed to know. Ammunition was low. Coordination was breaking down. What resistance remained was symbolic rather than effective. Mortar rounds landed behind the buildings, not on top of them, exploding in the frozen fields to cut off any possibility of retreat. The ground shook. Smoke drifted slowly through the cold air. American infantry advanced in short, careful rushes, using ditches, walls, and debris for cover. This was not chaos. This was late-war professionalism, learned through hard experience. Inside the buildings, the German rearguard fought briefly, almost mechanically. There was no counterattack, no attempt to maneuver. Some fired a few rounds and then stopped. Others simply stayed where they were. Within 15 minutes, the resistance collapsed. When the firing stopped, the silence returned. But it was different now. It was not threatening. It was final. An American medic moved immediately toward a wounded German soldier lying in the yard, calling out weakly for help. No one ordered him to go. He went because that was what he had been trained to do. The wounded man was treated, bandaged, and carried aside. He survived. The major was found inside the main building. He was seated at a simple wooden table, his posture straight, despite everything. His pistol lay beside him, unloaded. His gloves had been removed carefully and placed next to it, parallel, deliberate. When the Americans entered, weapons raised, he stood calmly. He did not raise his hands until asked. There was no defiance left in the gesture, only formality. The American lieutenant who had watched him through binoculars earlier stepped forward, mud-streaked, breathing hard, exhaustion written into every movement. Through an interpreter, he asked a question that had been forming in his mind since the first rifle shot. "Why did you refuse to surrender when you had the chance?" The major answered without hesitation. He said surrender, for him, was not something to be demanded. It was something to be earned. That an officer's duty was to resist until resistance no longer carried meaning. That he wanted his men to see he did not abandon his post lightly, even when the outcome was no longer in doubt. The lieutenant listened. He had heard explanations like this before. Some made sense, others did not. He did not argue. He simply nodded and ordered the major searched and escorted outside. What happened next surprised many of the American soldiers watching. The major was not shoved. His insignia were not torn from his uniform. No one shouted at him. One of the enlisted men offered him a cigarette. The major hesitated, then accepted. Another soldier noticed the major's boots were soaked through from standing in the cold, and quietly pointed him toward a barrel fire where prisoners were being allowed to warm themselves under guard. The major paused. For a moment it seemed as though he might refuse even that. Then he walked toward the fire. Later, during processing, the Americans learned more about him. He had served since before the war. He had fought on the Eastern Front. He had lost a son there. Whatever illusions he had once held were long gone. That night, he ate the same rations as the American soldiers guarding him. There was no special treatment. There was also no cruelty. In official reports, the incident barely registered. A brief resistance, several prisoners taken, no American casualties. In the scale of World War II, it was insignificant. A footnote, a line of text, if that. But for the men who were there, it stayed with them. They remembered the officer who chose resistance even when it no longer changed the outcome. They remembered the commander who chose to wait instead of destroy. They remembered that an hour of restraint spared lives on both sides. They remembered how, at the end of a long war, dignity still mattered, because wars do not always end with great victories or dramatic defeats. Sometimes they end in moments like this, quiet, restrained, human, moments where enemies stop being symbols and become men again. Moments where the final judgment is not about who won or lost, but about how they behaved when the fighting no longer needed to continue. And that, perhaps more than any battle map or casualty report, is what remains.